Shenanigans, back again, and welcome to my new Hearthstone mini-series, made mainly for new players, the cards you're going to want for your decks. So we're going to start looking at the commons and of course the basic cards. Now when it comes to commons, I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to craft these cards because they're common. You're going to pick them up quite a lot. But in any event, these are kind of the better of the commons and basic cards. So with that said, let's take a look at the list. Let's start with our honorable mention, and that would go to the mechs and their friends. And we're talking only about neutral cards. Neutral cards can be used in every deck, of course, and so these are the kind of the just more generally useful cards. So looking here, honorable mention goes out to the mechs. Why? Well, it's because for their cost, they are relatively pretty powerful. The idea of just having the mech label gives all these other kinds of synergies, for example, with the Cogmaster, the Mech Warper, Tinkertown Technician, of course, class cards. Really popular one would, of course, be the Goblin Blast Mage. So having the mech synergy is very, very powerful. But they don't make the top 10 list when it comes to neutrals. Mainly because there's so many, and if you wanted to build a mech deck, you would want a whole bunch of these cards. And of course you'll get them over time. But we're just talking generally useful cards. These guys are just honorable mentions. So let's go ahead and get into the list proper. Starting with number 10, that of course is the Leper Gnome. Leper Gnome being 1 cost, 2/1, Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So why do I consider this a good card? Well, it's good in aggressive decks, where you want to damage the opponent, get their health down as quickly as possible. This is a very quick 1-drop minion that the opponent's not going to deal with pretty much without taking damage. Sure, they can kill it, they'll still take damage. If they don't kill it, it's a 2/1, sits on the board, you can use it to trade up. Against their 2-drop creature, and the opponent still takes damage. So, very decent card. So looking at number 9 on the list, this is more of a category than actual cards, and that of course would be, I guess, what you would call the pushers. So number 9 is a combination of the Abusive Sergeant, the Direwolf Alpha, let's find him here, the Direwolf Alpha, and, of course, the Dark Iron Dwarf. You notice all of these give a bonus attack to minions. Typically, you'll put them on friendly minions, and the reason why these cards are good, mainly in aggressive decks, is that you can use a smaller minion, say the Leper Gnome previously, give it +2 attack, or +1 attack in the case of the Direwolf, and trade up to a larger minion while you then place other minions on the table, so you can keep applying pressure and trading out. Very good in like your zoo-type decks. Another minor thing you can use, the Dark Iron or the Abusive, of course, you can trade up. You can use a BGH to kill off, say, a 5-attack minion, maybe Emperor Thaurissan, for example. Give him +2 attack, use the Big Game Hunter, and kill him off. So that's number 9. I guess you would call those maybe the pushers. Number 8 goes to a small group of cards. That would be your healers. Namely, the Antique Healbot, which of course is common, and the Earthen Ring Farseer. The idea behind these cards as to why they're good. They can be used in really any type of deck, but you're going to find them more often in your control and your combo type decks. Decks that need to buy some time so they can establish a board presence or pull off some kind of a large finishing combo. And both of these are very good at it. Restoring 8 health to your hero is nothing to sneeze at, and like I said, in a pinch, a lot of times these cards are not used in the same deck. You'll typically only use one or the other. So, and that depends really on the rest of the deck and what you really need. But to keep you in the game, restoring a little health, typically to your hero, very good stuff. Coming in at number 7, we have what I would probably call the Cyclers. And the most popular of those, of course, is the Acolyte of Pain, and to a lesser extent, Loot Hoarder. Why I consider these cards to be good? Well, they're generally used in the case of the Loot Hoarder, it's used in more of an aggressive style. You might even see it in Zoo. And in the case of Acolyte of Pain, you'll probably see it mostly in warrior decks, maybe in mage decks as well. It's more of a control type of card, and really all you're doing is pushing for card advantage. With the Acolyte of Pain, of course, you can use the mage ability to ping it, draw extra card. What you really want to do with an Acolyte is get as many card draws as possible. In the case of like warrior, they'll use whirlwinds and other things to clear the opponent's board while drawing one card at a time. If a warrior gets 3 cards off an Acolyte of Pain, you're probably in trouble. And when it comes to a Loot Hoarder, of course, you're only looking at 1 card. But just like the Leper Gnome, it's a card that can trade up, give you a card back. All in all, decent common cards. Coming in at number 6, it is a mech. It is the Annoyatron. The Annoyatron. So why is this card rate so high? And why is it not considered part of the mechs? Well, it is a mech, obviously, and if you're playing a mech deck, Annoyatron is a fine addition. The reason why this card stands out, of course, is just the idea that Taunt Divine Shield on a 2-cost minion. Now, obviously, it's not much better than a Goldshire Footman. For 1 mana more, though, that extra Divine Shield, of course with mech synergy if you're using it, makes this a very strong card for its cost. I've seen many games where it gets late in the game, the opponent plays something really large, maybe an Alexstrasza or something like that, and you respond with an Annoyatron, and if they can't deal with it, that Annoyatron, this 2-cost card, will effectively soak up 16 damage for 2 mana. It's a very, very strong card, and probably one that's used in a number of different decks. You'll see it in combo decks to stall. You'll see it sometimes, not often, but sometimes in control decks, again, just to stall, and definitely in aggressive decks to protect some of your smaller minions. So Annoyatron, great card. Coming in at number 5 is the Zombie Chow. Let's go get him. There he is. So 1 cost, 2/3. Death Rattle, restore 5 health to the enemy hero. That doesn't sound very good when you think about it. But here's where it's good, right? It's 1 mana, 2/3. The stats are actually very good for a 1-drop minion. Most of your other 1-drop minions, give or take, maybe a 2/1, right? So what this guy does is he's used mainly in control and sometimes combo decks. It's an early game stall tactic to help get rid of those early threats that the aggressive decks are going to play. You know, your small Leper Gnome type creatures, abusive sergeants, whatnot. In most cases, the Zombie Chow will trade 2 for 1 against those small creatures. Your opponent, of course, is going to get 5 health. But if you're on the defensive early game, you're probably not damaging the opponent anyway. In which case, that 5 health restoration to the opponent is negligible. Now, in the late game, Zombie Chow can be a bit of an issue. There will be times where you really don't have another option. You play the Chow, the opponent gets 5 health, and that kind of slows down your game. And that happens from time to time. But in most cases, an early Zombie Chow will definitely help keep you in the game for your later strategies. Should also note that a Zombie Chow, of course, is not a card you would get out of a pack. That is found in the 4th wing of Naxxramas, the Construct Quarter, as you defeat Gluth. You'll notice as we go through the series that Naxxramas is full of many good cards to pick up. Blackrock Mountain has a couple of good ones, but I would say overall, if it comes to picking one or the other for new players, Naxxramas is definitely where it's at. Coming in at number 4, we have the very basic, and you would say, unassuming, Ironbeak Owl. 2 mana, 2/1. Doesn't sound very good, but the battle cry, silence a minion. This is a very important kind of card, and you would think, well, it doesn't seem like it does all that much. Silence does quite a few things when you really think about it. Say you're playing an aggressive deck, maybe a zoo-type strategy, and your opponent plays a very large taunt, or any kind of taunt. Maybe they play the Annoyatron, for example, and you want to get through for lethal. Well, Ironbeak Owl, there's your answer. Of course, speaking of aggressive decks, Hunters will probably play an Ironbeak Owl, maybe too. Not only do they get the silence effect, but it is also a beast, which will help kill commands and things like that. Now, this Ironbeak Owl isn't used only in aggressive decks. It can also be used in control decks. You'll find it quite often in Handlock. You might even find it in a couple of other control decks, but in the case of Handlocks, they may use the Owl to silence one of your minions. They also may use it to silence one of their own minions. Effective strategy is to use the Ancient Watcher. Don't believe I have any of those, so let's... There we go. There's your Ancient Watcher. Of course, 2 mana, 4/5 can't attack. If they want an attacker very quickly, they can drop the Watcher, use the Owl to silence that. That's pretty common strategy. Coming in at number 3, another card you'll find in Max, and that is the Mad Scientist. 2 mana, 2/2. Death Rattle, put a secret from your deck into the battlefield. This is, in most cases, a ridiculous card. Okay, it's not all that good with Paladin, and of course, any class that doesn't use secrets, not going to find a lot of use with Mad Scientist. But in the case of Hunter and the case of Mage, especially Mage, it's ridiculously overpowered in some cases, right? Look at this. You have 2 mana for a 2/2. The stats are a little lower than what you would see. Like, your average card is probably 3/2. For 2 mana, you get a slightly smaller minion that dies, and you then get a 2 or a 3 cost card directly into play. Not to your hand, etc. Directly into play. So it's pretty obvious, especially in the case of Hunter and Mage, as to how powerful this card really is. Of course, you can find the Mad Scientist in the 4th wing of Naxxramas after defeating Grobulus. Again, Naxxramas, very strong set of cards. Get into that content and get those cards. And speaking of Naxxramas, let's move on to number 2. Number 2 on the list, which is the Haunted Creeper. Haunted Creeper, of course, you can find in the Arachnid Quarter fighting Anubra Khan, which I think is the very first boss of Nax, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, this is a very strong card. You 2 mana, 1/2. Now, first off, you have the Beast Synergy, so you're going to see this in Hunter decks, especially the Face Hunter decks, because it, too, of course, can trade up. It doesn't look like it, but when it dies, it's going to summon 2 1/1 spiders. So, let's look at the stats on this. Forget the Beast thing for a minute. Why this is a good card. So, Death Rattle minions that summon other things, such as the Harvest Golem, etc., they're called sticky minions, because it's very difficult to take care of them. Yes, you can silence this, but that's kind of a waste of a silence if the opponent drops something really large, a Mal'Ganis, Satirian Fordring, you know, so on and so forth. You're going to want to save your silences probably for something a lot more threatening. Haunted Creeper, while it's annoying, is not usually very threatening. So it gets away with death rattling 2 1/1 spiders. If you add up the stats here, right? So 2 mana, you have a 1/2, and then a 1/1 and a 1/1. So that's 3/4 worth of stats for only 2 mana. It's divided among several creatures. In the case of AoE type removal, yes, it will go down fairly quickly, but you have to kill the Haunted Creeper and then deal with the 1/1s. That's why they call it a sticky minion. That's why it is a strong card. You're going to see it a lot of times in aggro decks. And sometimes I guess you could use it as an early game type of card to help stave off aggressive decks. Though I think Zombie Chow's a little bit better for that. Finally, let's look at the number 1 card. The number 1 basic card, that is. Of course, that is the Piloted Shredder. Yes, it is a mech. Like the Annoy, it's head and shoulders above all the other mechs. You're going to play this in a deck that may not run mechs at all. And of course, it synergizes quite well if you are using mechs. You say, well, why is this card so good? Well, it's the type of card that can go into literally any kind of deck, right? You can put it in an aggressive deck, such as Zoo, and you've got a 4/3 body that's going to die and summon a random 2-drop minion. It has the mech synergy, which we've already gone over a little bit. You can put it in a control deck as a solid 4-drop minion. Same thing goes with combo decks, though combo decks, kind of like your rogues, your Grim Patron warriors, may not find enough room to put this in, but if a control deck or a combo deck needs a solid 4-drop, they're going to go to the Piloted Shredder first. Just like the Haunted Creeper, it is a sticky minion. You have to kill it twice. You have to kill this incarnation, then you have to kill the next card that comes out of it, the random 2-cost minion. Sometimes your random 2-cost minion may be Nat Pagel. Sometimes it may be Doomsayer. Sometimes it may be Millhouse Manastorm, 4/4, with no drawback because it's a battle cry. Battle cries don't go off that way. In any case, you're probably going to get value out of this card, though. Let's compare it to, say, the standard 4-cost card, which would be the Yeti, right? So, and even the mechanical Yeti, not a big difference here. Let's just look at the stats. So 4 mana, you have a 4/5. This was considered during the early days of Hearthstone one of the most solid cards, and even in Arena is still a very, very solid pick. Why is Piloted Shredder better? Well, Piloted Shredder is 4/3. This is 4/5. It has 2 more health. You have to kill the Piloted Shredder twice, and if you go off the assumption that a standard 2-drop minion is probably a 3/2, right? That's your average, is a 3/2. You are getting a 7/5. And of course, those are split up, so it's not going to get BGH'd, etc. It's not going to get Shadow Word Deathed. They have to kill it twice. That is why Piloted Shredder beats Yeti hands down all the time. And that will do it for this first episode of the top cards through Hearthstone. This, of course, is up to the Blackrock Mountain expansion, which we've had just relatively recently. Join me next time. We'll look at the top rares, and of course, later on we'll go through the epics, the legends, so on and so forth. I wouldn't go out of my way necessarily to craft the common cards, but considering their cost, if you really needed, say, a second Piloted Shredder, it is only 40 dust. Might be worth it. Till then, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more Hearthstone videos, things like that, make sure to give me a like. Until next time, take care, guys.